All right. Well, welcome you guys. I am Sally Baker. I am our Director of Education here at Family Connection of South Carolina. I've been here for about 6 years. So I added an extra year to that, 5 years. I've been here for 5 years, guys. Um, so we appreciate you guys joining, and I'll let Hannah introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Hannah Mathis. I see some familiar faces. Simone, I don't know if you remember me, but we did group social work together. But anyway, I have been here almost a year at the end of this month. I'm a family education specialist and then the transition coordinator as well. So, hey, Simone. And I'm excited to do this presentation with you. So, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat or talk, just like Sally said.
So I'm going to go ahead and get everything switched over to our PowerPoint in just here in a second, but I also wanted to let you know that throughout the PowerPoint or throughout the presentation this afternoon, Hannah and I have pulled out different helpful links that will be helpful for you. Some of these are linked in the resources that you should have already received from Melissa, um, but they will be in the chat. So you'll see us just kind of popping stuff in throughout the conversation today. And like we said, it's a smaller group today, which I love. So because we can interact and engage, and if you guys have questions, feel free to let us know. So I'm gonna do my best to get our PowerPoint up for you. Give me 1 second because it's gonna make me have to switch my screen funny. All right, and we are going to go from here. Sorry, guys. There we go. All right, so hopefully you guys are now seeing our slides. Let me make sure. Yep. Okay. So this today, you guys you have joined us for turning 18 in South Carolina, and what individuals with disabilities and their families should consider. This workshop is done. Like we've said, we are from Family Connection of South Carolina, but we've done this workshop in conjunction with PTC, which is the Parent Training and Information Center in Virginia. So South Carolina, or sorry, Family Connection is the Parent Training Information Center for South Carolina. And there is a grant out that through OSEP, through the Federal Department of Education, who has allowed PT to help work around some transition materials and working with a couple of different centers around the country. So we are one of those, and that is why we're here today, and they've helped us pull this information together. We have to give you the little disclaimer. Okay, there we go. That this is where this is coming from. This is how it's funded. We are not gaining anything extra by doing this, but this being a part of the PTI allows us to do these types of trainings for you guys at no cost. So that is who we are and kind of why we're here. So we're going to just kind of dive right in. We're going to start talking about why we're here and being at the age of majority. If you're comfortable, if you guys don't mind, if you'll drop in the chat maybe the age of your child that you're here with today. If you're not comfortable with that, that is totally fine. It just helps Hannah and I to know kind of where you are on your journey. In South Carolina, we think, well, in general, right? We think about an adult being someone who's over 18. So legally in our state, when you turn 18, that young adult is now presumed to be competent as a competent adult unless a court determines otherwise. There are some days I still question my own competency in being an adult. So 18, we think about, those are our babies. They're still our babies at 18. And what does that look like? And how do we, how do we support them kind of as they move through this process in this age and this transition? But adults, as you guys know, have legal rights. Parents no longer have that legal authority over a young adult once they turn 18. So one day you've got that legal authority over them, and the next day you don't, and it's switched. So therefore, when your child turns 18, they are now supposed to be the person who makes those legal, financial, medical, and educational decisions for their life. For some individuals with disabilities, this is not going to be an issue. For others, they might need more support. So thinking about what levels and what types of support will your young adult need. For me myself, I am over 18, but I still sometimes need assistance too in making those decisions, right? I don't do my taxes on my own. I use an accountant, someone who helps me with that. I talk to my husband about some of our bigger choices and decisions that we have to make. That's using assistance. So if you think about it in those terms, it's not quite as daunting to think about I have to go get some type of like formal legal paper that says that I can help them. You can still help your young adult make those decisions, even if it's an informal conversation back and forth. Um, so in this workshop, we're going to talk about different things that parents and guardians should consider. Everyone will not need to do all of the things that we talk about today. Some may not even qualify for some of the things that we'll talk about today. But each person has different supports and will qualify for different services that are out there. So I want to take a second to just kind of talk about the difference between school services and adult services, right? So traditionally, when we think about someone turning 18, they're moving out of school. They're typically, right? We know that if your student is receiving special education services, they can stay in for longer. But typically, we're now looking at transitioning into those adult services. So in special education in the school system, the services that a student gets are based on a need, right? They go through qualifying, they have a need to be able to access their education. There's typically not a wait list for the services that they're provided in school. And then the school coordinates it all. Like you as the parent, you are there, you're a part of the team and having those conversations. But the school really is like, hey, we have this, this, and this. We'll call in the right people and get them there to provide those services for you. However, when you jump to the adult side, most services that are out there and available have specific eligibility criteria. There are specific things that you have to meet or an individual has to meet in order to receive those services. There are long wait lists for a lot of things. We know in our state there are some that are super long, and you may need to get on those wait lists before your child turns 18. And we'll talk through some of that today as well. And then there's no single coordinator for those services. You might have a case manager through one organization, but you still have to call another organization to get their services. So there's not typically one single point of entry, if you will, to get those services coordinated. So just thinking about those types of things of that entitlement as a student who is entitled to receive services to gain access to their education versus being eligible for services that they might need or want.
Okay, next is me. I'm not as eloquent as Sally, so I'm so sorry. But today's presentation, I want to preface, is just the tip of an iceberg, which is why we have a lovely picture of an iceberg. So there's a lot under the surface and lots of particular details that go into a lot of the things that we're going to be speaking about. So don't feel like you can't reach out, or if you have any other questions that you can't ask, but just know this is just general information for you to know and start pondering on, and things for you to start having conversations with your child about and things of that nature. So no, this is not a very detailed presentation, but just an overview so that you can kind of start thinking about general ideas moving forward. So next is medical providers. So as we're learning more about what pediatric to adult medical home care looks like, we got to think about when that transition age is for pediatric providers, whether that's going to be 18, 21, 26, is very different for each provider. So that's a conversation that you should start having early on, and whether or not the pediatrician is going to make that referral for you, whether or not you need to do that yourself. And then whether or not you're going to have a meeting to make a packet to transfer over to an adult medical home, and things like that. Then also including your young adult in this conversation, and what do they like about their doctor, whether that's a female or a male, or whether they're funny, or different details that they like about that provider is a good conversation to have, so they can not only start taking control of that adult medical home, but also so they know exactly what they're looking for in a provider in the case that they need to make that decision on their own one day. And then also thinking about where the adult medical home is going to be. So if you're thinking about an 18-year-old, maybe they're going to go off to college, or they're going to be living on their own. Where is that adult medical home going to be, and who needs to initiate that start is really, really important for you moving forward. Next is the Selective Services. I don't know a whole lot about this because I am not a male, and so thankfully I do not have to enroll. But if your child is born a male, it is required that they enroll before they turn 18 years old. And there's definitely a link that we'll put in the chat for how to go about doing that, but it is legally required that they begin that enrollment process at 18 years old. It's a super easy registration form from what I understand. I haven't done it myself, but I also meant to preface this at the beginning, but I have a brother who turned 21 today, who has autism, ADHD, all kinds of good stuff going for him. But that's kind of where I come in with understanding all of this. So, and as you can tell, I am of the youth-ish range. Um, so I come to this with, perspective on what it's like to learn about that transition to medical home. Not only from my brother's perspective as he is a person with a disability, but also from his perspective as watching my mother navigate it with him, and also being his sibling, so learning how the challenges for him have come about. So, talking to my brother, he had to enlist as, in this one, he turned 18, and well, that's a scary thought. Um, he had to do it because that's his legal requirement.
And I'll just add in, I had this conversation with one of our colleagues yesterday. We were prepping and talking about this slide. And like Hannah, I am born female. And I was like, wow, people still do this? I had no idea. And to my understanding and my knowledge, on the registration form, which we just dropped the link in the chat for you guys, it does not ask a question about disability. It is pretty straightforward, pretty not, I mean, there's not a whole lot of additional information that's added in there. So what it would mean is if a draft was reinstated, they would then go through and as they call the draft, then look at who is eligible. So don't think that just because you've now helped your young adult to enroll in this, that they need to, that they're automatically going to be qualified for it. But it does not. And I had to do some digging to learn this. But yeah, so don't panic on that front.
I think so.
Yeah.
So next is talking about forms of identification. And so while I'll tell you that my brother driving a vehicle is wow. Don't get in the car with him ever, but he does have a driver's license. He does drive a vehicle. That's all he talks about is his vehicle, so with the IA, but he does have a driver's license, and that may not be the most appropriate form of identification for everybody, but it is important as you're thinking about transitioning to adulthood and age of majority that they do have some form of identification, whether that's a driver's license, an ID card, state ID card, passport, etc. It's important for them to have that. And also to remember the little star that's on there is your real ID. And you have to have that on your ID to travel domestically in a plane before 2025. May 7th, 2025 is the date for that. So you still have a little bit of time, but just remembering that that is a requirement for all persons who are trying to travel domestically via flight. Registering to vote. So as you're thinking about, all right, I'm on the way to the DMV and I'm going to get my form of identification with my young adult, you can also register to vote while you're there. So that's a process that can go through that. You can also do that online or any of the commission offices that are around. And it's really important that is a conversation you have, that your young adult has that right to vote once they turn 18 years old. And really important to have the conversation about what that means, how many elections there are and things of that nature, but just remembering that they do have that right, even though they may not understand all the ins and outs. Is a great conversation to have. And as a reminder, and we'll talk about later about different forms of guardianship and things of that nature, but a kiddo who has guardianship or a parent who has guardianship over their child does not have the right to vote anymore. So something to definitely think about when you're considering this.
So another big milestone when you turn 18 that I think we all probably were super excited about when we turned 18 is opening a bank account. Thinking about this is something now I get to put my own money somewhere if you didn't have one before you turned 18. So this is a right that everybody can have. You can have a bank account that is an individual account. So maybe you personally have one that is just for you. Or maybe you have a joint account, maybe with your spouse or your partner. Just like us parents a lot of times have that joint account with our spouse or partner, you can also have a joint account with your child. So if that's something that brings comfort and gives that little level of support so that you can maybe help them learn to manage their money, learn to manage what comes in and what goes out. And nobody, nobody balances a checkbook anymore and doesn't have like the check registers. Maybe some do. I was never good at that, right? Like, but having that ability to have that conversation with my parent about how do I do this? Why is it important? These are the things that, you want to think about. The joint bank account, again, can just kind of protect that individual who maybe doesn't know how to manage their own money just yet, and helps prevent that financial exploitation. So sometimes we know that individuals with disabilities are at a higher risk for being exploited and taken advantage of. And having that joint account would maybe help you or your young adult, to not be taken advantage of by someone saying like, hey, can you just lend me some money? Like, I know you've got some money in that account over there. So having someone that can just kind of help to look over the finances, but not necessarily be the person who is in charge of spending the money. There are some legal alternatives for your young adult if they're unable to manage their own finances, including serving as your child's representative payee, which would be through SSI, or having, a separate bank account. There are things like, sorry, my brain just skipped a beat for a second, like the ABLE savings account. So in our state, we do have an ABLE savings account, and these are accounts that are set up to help individuals with disabilities save money to pay for qualified expenses without being taxed on their earnings, and in most cases without losing their eligibility for services like SSI or Medicaid. So it's just another way for individuals to have a way to protect their money and have their money set aside without it then counting towards that income criteria that might be an eligibility criteria for some services. There are, and I say that because there are some financial limitations with things like SSI and some of the home and community-based waivers. So if they have more than a certain amount of money, usually about $2,000 in their savings account, then you may want to consider an ABLE savings account. So the remainder of what we're going to kind of talk about today is really dependent on the individual support needs. What are they? What are their needs? Where do they kind of fall on that spectrum, right? We know everything is done on a spectrum. So do they need a lot of support, or do they need just a little bit of support and kind of that behind the scenes talking in the back of their ear to help them make those decisions? And then we're going to talk about, what is dependent on the individual meeting those eligibility criterias. And again, remember, everything we talk about is not going to be applicable to everyone on this call. And so there may be some things that you just need to consider. I know we talked to someone right before this was starting that was like, hey, my kid's not 18 yet, but I just want to start thinking about what do I need to think about? I think as parents, we do that all the time, right? From the moment that they're born, we're like, hey, what do I need to think about that I'm not already thinking about? So the fact that you guys are all here today, kudos, and you're exactly where you need to be to start thinking about these conversations. So we're going to start with talking about exiting high school. Everybody, most teens are excited about leaving high school and kind of moving on to what's next. I talked to a high school senior yesterday, and I was like, hey, congratulations, you're graduating. He's like, yeah, but like, I still have to go to school next year. And I was like, okay, fair. You get a little break, but you're right. You get to graduate and now you get to do something different. So if your young adult has an IEP, you're going to want to verify with your child's case manager or their school counselor on what their anticipated graduation date is or their exit date from high school. So again, in our state, students typically graduate around 18. But if your child has an IEP, they may be eligible to stay in school past their 18th birthday. And so knowing where your child falls in that spectrum and whether they should be anticipating graduating at 18 or graduating maybe closer to 21, just having that conversation back and forth. In South Carolina, we have one true high school diploma. This is designed to prepare students to be college and career ready. It's what you think about as a typical diploma that anyone is going to receive when they graduate high school and they've met all of those credits and they've gone through all the litany of you have to have this and this and this, and then now here's your diploma and you get to go on to what's next. Each student with a disability or not has what we call an IGP, so an individualized or an individual graduation plan. There's so many acronyms in this world, you guys. But that IGP really helps to kind of map out the courses that a student's going to take based on their interest and, kind of what they think maybe they want to do when they leave high school. I don't know about you guys, but my trajectory took a couple of turns after I left high school. I thought I knew for sure what I was going to do. and that changed, that shifted for me, and that's not what I did. So it's not, at that IGP, they're not setting the course necessarily for their life. They're just kind of getting on a track of what they think they might be interested in. For students who do have an IEP, that IGP can be done during an IEP meeting, or it can be done at a separate meeting. And so they can have that conversation with their counselor and kind of work towards what courses should we kind of navigate towards to get you to that point of being ready to graduate at the end of high school. In our state, one thing that we do have is what's called the South Carolina High School Credential. So that is another option, another tract for students, and that is something that is available to students who have an IEP and maybe just can't meet quite the rigor of the credits needed to graduate with a high school diploma. With the high school credential, students still have to meet credits. They put together more of a portfolio, like a work portfolio, and there's a little bit more of an emphasis on the career readiness. So they get to go out into the community and do different career training opportunities. And so that credential is something that a student can come out of high school with. And that aligns with the profile of the South Carolina graduate, high school graduate that our State Department has outlined. And then the other option would be a certificate. So this is a certificate of attendance, more or less, for students who couldn't quite meet the rigor of meeting 24 different credits that they need to graduate high school with a traditional diploma. Know that a student who graduates with the high school credential or a certificate may have some impact on their I won't say their employability, their applications for employment. Because there is usually a box that says, like, did you graduate high school? Yes or no. So you graduated, but you don't have a diploma. So it can look a little different and just is a conversation. The high school credential is newer. It's only been around for a few years. And so businesses and the community are still learning about it, and it's out there. So just know that can look a little different and can maybe potentially cause some different conversations to need to happen as a student is applying for jobs out of high school. So the next thing to think about is that transfer of rights at age 18. So again, remember at 18, all of a sudden they're an adult. They get to make their own decisions. Under IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, that law that allows us to support students in special education and provide them that service, does say that all educational decisions transfer to the student when they turn 18. Once they reach that age of majority, which again is 18 in our state. So it does require, the IDEA does require that the IEP teams go over any rights that will transfer at that age with parents and the students at least 1 year prior to the student turning 18. So keep that in mind if you have, I think a couple of you mentioned you have 17-year-olds, 15, 16, keeping in mind that the IEP is good for the year. And so if your child is going to be turning 18, you want to make sure that you're having that conversation about that transfer of rights at least 1 year prior. So if you're only having one meeting per year, making sure that that's happening earlier on. Parents can absolutely stay involved in their child's education, but schools have to respect that the educational decisions are now the right of the student. And some students may not need that assistance in making their educational decisions, but others might. And so in our state, again, in South Carolina, we, in 2016, I have to read the name of this because I say it wrong every time. South Carolina enacted the Adult Services with Adult Students with Disabilities Educational Rights Consent Act, or you might just hear it called the Consent Act. And so that then gives there a couple of different options that happen when a student turns 18 under that act. And one option, I'm not going to go into super detail on all of these, one option is all the rights transfer to the student, period, blank. Everything goes over straight to the student. Option two is that the student makes decisions with support and assistance, and they have making sure that they have the right adult with them to help make those decisions. So one thing that you may have heard of is supported decision making. And so that term is very, very simply, it's just an informal way of seeking advice and guidance on making decisions. Again, we go back to, I am married and I have a husband, and I will go to him and I'll say, like, hey, can you help me make these decisions? Or I have a lot of friends who are in the healthcare profession, and I'll say, hey guys, like, this is kind of being presented to me. can you give me some insight into what maybe is a good choice, right? And keeping in mind that everything is dependent on what is right for you, your student, and your family. And then option 3 is the delegation of rights. So a student who has capacity to do so can actually sign a power of attorney and delegate their rights to someone else. So maybe they are capable of making those decisions, but they just don't really want to because they don't feel 100% certain. They can sign those educational decision making rights over to their parent at age 18. So if they're going to stay, let's say they're going to stay in school until they turn 21, maybe they want to allow you as the parent to continue to make those decisions because you've done a great job for the 18 years before now, right? So they want you to just keep helping them out until they get out of school. The South Carolina Department of Education has a special form for this and can be used if you're a student and you choose that that's the right option. But they have to understand what they're signing away before they can sign it. They need to fully understand what that means and that they then will not have the ability to make the last decision or last choice in whatever decision you guys are making. Option 4 is an educational representative. So this is where there's a little bit more of a formal process and an individual has been determined that they just are not competent they can't adequately communicate their needs, their wants, their desires, their preferences, and their wishes. And so a medical professional can certify that, and then that document goes back to the school, and it would allow you as the parent or whoever the decision-making person is to continue to make those decisions for a student. And then part of that, again, we talked a lot about eligibility, right? So part of that not being able to adequately express and communicate their wants, wishes, desires, the medical professional has to they have to certify that they are not able to do that at the age of 18 and that will continue until at least 21 because we've got that ability to stay in school until you're 21. And then the district must notify the student in writing of the determination and that an educational representative has been appointed. And then the last option that comes under this consent act is guardianship. So like Hannah mentioned earlier, that's when a probate court actually comes in and assigns where they're going to assign who's going to make those decisions for an individual. The guardian becomes the substitute decision maker, and that can include those educational rights. That's a lot of information on that one. And note too, we forgot to mention this at the beginning, a lot of what we're talking about today could be its own workshop in and of itself. So if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat, but also you can always reach out to Family Connection so that we can help answer those on a more case-by-case basis. And then we probably will have trainings coming up about a lot of these things. So just know we're, like Hannah said, this is tip of the iceberg today. The next thing, big question that I think it comes up a lot is that supplemental security income, so SSI. So you need to consider, should your child apply for this once they turn 18? Is this something that you guys should consider? SSI, just so everybody's on the same page, is a federally funded needs-based disability program for adults and children who need that monthly cash benefit, right? So then there would be cash that comes directly into their account. So back again to that opening a bank account and knowing which type of account is right for you and your family. South Carolinians can apply for SSI benefits at their local Social Security Administration field office. A lot of words. You can also submit it by phone, and I'm going to drop the phone number and the website in the chat in just a second. And then there's also the website where you can go in and apply for these benefits. Once the application is received, it's initially processed by the local office and then sent to the South Carolina Disability Determination Services, which makes the final decisions. And we have offices for determination in Charleston, Greenville, and West Columbia. And some of the things they have to consider kind of like what the level of disability is and what the level of support needs are in order to determine if someone is eligible for SSI benefits.
Okay, Medicaid, all the fun things. And I wanted to pause because I know we talked about a lot of information. Are there any questions or anything that you would like clarification on? You're welcome to put it in the chat or unmute yourself. And it's okay if not. Your brain may be like. Okay, well, I'll keep going, but if anybody has questions, feel free to interrupt me. You're more than welcome to. But Medicaid is a health insurance program, and that is through Healthy Connections. So we are not Healthy Connections. We're Family Connection. Lots of families call and are like, I'm here to talk about Healthy Connections, and that's not us. However, we have lots of experience in that area. We have lots of families that come through and have questions, and we can definitely answer those, but know that we do not have access to Medicaid files. We cannot look at any of that. Um, but with all that to say, if you need help with any of the Medicaid applications, such as if you're going to be applying for that individually with your child or young adult, the link is in the chat. And then SC Thrive is also a really great agency that we partner with that will help walk you through the whole process of applying for it. Just if you have any extra questions or anything seems complicated, happy to help out with that for sure. Military families. So a cool thing about military families is they have a separate type of insurance that they can look into called TRICARE. And that's for individuals who have disabilities, a child who has disabilities. And all that has to be presented is a military identification card. And those, hold on. Okay, and children are covered until age 23. So after that, you start talking with your young adult about other options. But more specific questions, you can definitely give us a call and we can walk through some of that. Maybe not me because I don't know all the ins and outs, but more than happy to do that with you. But military families, there are a couple other options for you. And there's a great website that's called the DFAS, and that link will be put in the chat as well. And that will help you walk through the TRICARE application and things of that nature. Okay, Medicaid waivers. So we have 8 waivers in South Carolina. It was previously 7, now it's 8. That's the community choice waiver, the community supports waiver, the IDRD waiver, the head and spinal cord injury waiver, the HIV and AIDS waiver, medically complex waiver for children, the ventilator dependent waiver for adults, and then the Palmetto coordinated systems of care. So lots of adults. And if you do not know if your child is on the waiver or not, you can definitely give the Department of Disabilities Special Needs, or as we call it here, DDSN, a call. And that link with the information will also be put in the chat as well. But they'll be able to tell you what all types of services are available through the waiver. If you're still on the wait list, you know what number you are. And if you're not connected with DDSN at all and think that your child may qualify, definitely reach out as soon as possible, just because those wait lists can be a long time, as many of you probably already know. um, but those Medicaid waivers you can reach out to DDSN and they'll be able to tell you exactly where you're on the wait list, who your case manager is, and any details you need to know about services that are provided through the waiver. And Sally mentioned this a little bit earlier about the Palmetto Able Savings Account. And just so you know, you can still be eligible for SSI or SSDI and still qualify for the Palmetto Able account. But you have to qualify for either one of those programs before you turn 26 years old. So just something to think about as you're thinking about that program, savings program. It's really great. Miss Karen, who's over it, she's fabulous, will answer any of your questions. But it's great if you're thinking about I talk with many families who have older parents of children with youth, goodness gracious, of youth with disabilities, and thinking, I really want to make sure that my child has something, financially stable if something ever happens to me. And this is a great program for you to invest in and think about. And yes. Okay, Voc Rehab. So Voc Rehab is a great program that gives job training skills as well as competitive employment skills for a child moving forward. And you can start that as early as age 13. They have a pre-ETS program. So you can start that whenever you're starting to talk about that transition age IEP at school. Definitely start having that conversation not only with the school providers, but with the rehab. And oftentimes they're invited to those meetings already, but if they're not, you can definitely reach out and start talking to them about programs. And that's specifically for job training skills for youth and young adults who have disabilities. And maybe who are not on the diploma track, but on a credential track. Um, and just learning more about what their strengths are, and what maybe deficits they have in those employability skills, and what all they may see themselves doing moving forward as far as employability goes. And again, a great conversation for you to start having when they turn 13, and start having that transition IEP meetings and things of that nature. Um, so like I said, they have a pre-ETS program that starts at 13, a group transition services that starts at 14. And all you have to do is reach out to Voc Rehab directly, and they will go through an evaluation process to just learn what skills they are. There's some in-person evaluations they have to do, as well as some writing. And that just sees where they are as well as far as communication, physical accommodations that they maybe need in the workplace, and then different skills that they already have and things that Voc Rehab can help them learn in the future.
So, independent housing. So now you got to think about, and it's a scary thought for any parent at any point, disability or no, is my child going to live on their own? Are they going to move out? Are they going to have their own housing? How is that going to work? Um, in South Carolina, our housing authority does have a housing choice voucher program, which is available to assist low income people, including those with disabilities, to afford housing in the private market community. So there are some options out there. There's no specific voucher for individuals with disabilities in South Carolina. It's all one voucher option. And at present, the wait list is like 3 to 5 years. So again, we talked about some of these wait lists for this eligibility are long. So this is one of those that's long, but this is something, if that is a goal of your young adult and a goal for you as a family to have your young adult move out and be independent and live on their own, these are conversations to start thinking about. Start talking to your child's case manager if they're on some of these waivers. When should we get on the wait list for this voucher if that's something that is of interest to you, or would be helpful and useful for you guys? When do I do that? Who do I talk to? Where do I go? What type of housing options are there? Thinking about would they do better in a house that is, let's say, a townhome? So there's people that are close by, gated community, an individual single family home right there on their own, an apartment. What looks best and what looks right for your individual? Another really great resource that is out there for individuals with disabilities who are thinking about living on their own and thinking about things that like I might not even think about that you need to consider, would be our centers for independent living. So in our state, we have 3 centers for independent living, or you might hear them called a SIL, CIL. And we have 3 of those. So it is Able South Carolina, Walton Options, and Accessibility. I'm going to drop the link to there's a website that tells you all about what a Center for Independent Living is and does. And then there's a map that'll also show you where they cover in the state. So there are a few counties in our state who are not covered by a Center for Independent Living. But a lot of the ones that we do have will still provide information and resources if you live in that area where there isn't one with coverage. But those may be some routes to take when you're thinking about it. And again, there's so many things to consider, right? Like, will they need first floor, um, a unit, sorry, I can't remember that word, a unit that's on the first floor versus one that's on an upper floor? Is there, will they know how to navigate that? Will they know about fire escapes? All the different things that we might not always think about when we're first looking at a home or a place to live. So further education, we've gotten them out of high school. We've gotten that bank account open. We're setting up with Voc Rehab. We are thinking about where we're going to live. But maybe your individual wants to go and work, go to 4-year college, or go to a trade school, or whatever it might be. There's a lot of different options that are out there. Some of those might be, like I mentioned, like the 4-year community or 4-year colleges. It might be the community college. vocational and technical schools, college experiences. There are some college experiences for students with disabilities, local training programs, apprenticeships, internships, AmeriCorps, which is like the Peace Corps, but it's here within the U.S. There's lots of different options out there, and these are options that are out there for anyone. And I'll say, like, I come from a family where my mom has a 4-year degree. I have a 4-year degree and a master's. My dad graduated high school and that was it, but ran a business for over 40 years. My sister went to a tech community school and got a certificate for something that she's interested in. There's so many options out there, and one is not better than the other. It's what's right for your student. What I'm proud of in our state is that we now have 6. It's been 5 up until this year. We have 6 programs in South Carolina that college programs that offer programs for students with disabilities who have not earned that high school diploma. So remember, we talked about the credential and a certificate. So if your student has come out of high school with one of those 2 options, there are 6 programs in our state. So I'm going to list them out. One is at Clemson University, and that is called Clemson Life. One is at the University of South Carolina here in Columbia, and that one is called Carolina Life. There's Winthrop College, has their Think College, and we're both Winthrop grads, just saying. And then there's Coastal Carolina University, which has Coastal Carolina Life, and then College of Charleston also has one called Reach. And as of this year, USC Aiken has started a new program called Pacer Life. So there's a lot of opportunities that are growing and becoming available to individuals with disabilities or students with developmental disabilities. And in these programs, these students get to experience campus life, right? They get to develop those skills that are necessary to gain employment. They live on campus. They have age-appropriate peer mentors to assist in navigating the campus life. I would have loved to have had that myself. These students receive, when they finish, at the end of their program, they receive a certificate of post-secondary education. So it's not an accredited college diploma, but it is a skills portfolio that then you could take to an employer and say, like, here is what I was able to do. Here's what I can do, and here's where I can shine for you. So if you're interested in that or you want to know more about it, talk with your child's school counselors and see if I bet they've got pamphlets and brochures and information. You can Google any of those and they will be there and available for you as well. So thinking about college and kind of what to do next and what to think about. In high school, your student had an IEP, maybe a 504 plan. These things don't transfer with you to college. An IEP is good up through age 21 if your student is still in school at age 21. If they exit high school at 18, that IEP stops at 18. A 504 plan is something that is done through a different law, right? So it's done through the Americans with Disabilities Act, which the ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, does carry over to college in that a student cannot be discriminated against because of a disability for any reason. What doesn't transfer is that physical piece of paper, that physical 504. A student then goes to college and needs to go to the Disability Support Services. Most colleges have a different name. They all call them something different. Surprise, surprise. So there might be the Disability Supports Office. There might be, now I forgot what it's called in Carolina, but there's a lot of different offices you can go to there, and the student themselves has to self-identify. So you as a parent may want to call that Disability Services office just to find out what services they offer. What can they do for your student once they enroll? But your student, if they require, let's say, extended time as an accommodation for assignments, maybe they need a mentor, maybe they need printed notes because they're not able to take written notes, or they need to be able to record course sessions or classes. Those types of accommodations would need to go through that Disability Support Service office. And so your student would need to go in and identify themselves as an individual with a disability and say, these are what I need to be successful. And they can take their IEP, they can take their 504, they can certainly take those documents to say, this is what I've had in the past. Can we have a conversation about what might be available to me here? And then that document is sent to the professors that the classes that your child enrolls in, so that those professors know what accommodations to be sure to provide to your student. I'm trying to make sure there's not something that I forgot to mention. So bottom line here is really you want to talk to your child's school counselor and just kind of see what's out there and what's potentially available to your student. And as a parent, that's where we have to kind of take that step back because we no longer can drive that bus. We can no longer say, I want to make sure that my student has X, Y, and Z accommodation. Your student then has to take the reins and have that conversation. So now we're going to switch gears just a little bit. And we're going to spend a few minutes on kind of thinking about decision making and financial options that are important for us to know and to think about as 18 gets closer and closer to for some of you guys. So this is going to be just kind of that quick overview. Again, we're going to cover some complex issues and decisions, but you may really want to consider making an appointment with an elder law attorney or an attorney who's experienced in disability law. There are a lot of rights and things that are out there that you want to make sure that are being followed and that you or your young adult are not being taken advantage of as you are thinking about that future planning for your child and your family. So I'm going to drop some more resources for you in the chat, and I realized I forgot to put the Centers for Independent Living in there, so I'm going to do that too. But I'm going to drop some different resources in there for you to help you find these are links and resources to help you find these attorneys. One of them is going to be the National Elder Law Database. So again, this is where you can go in and find an attorney who specializes in elder law in your area. Another is, you see on the screen, it says protection and advocacy organizations. Every state has a protection and advocacy or a PNA organization in their state. Ours, their name is Disability Rights South Carolina. So I'm going to drop their information in the chat. There's also the Special Needs Alliance, where you can find an attorney, and then the South Carolina Elder Law Attorney. So I'm going to drop all of those for you in the chat here in just a second, but really thinking about making those appointments just to have that consult and that conversation. You might not need to make a decision while you're in the office at that moment, but just starting those conversations and knowing what you need to think about.
So we're going to begin with talking about decision-making options. So the top that you see on your screen is the least restrictive starting with supported decision-making, going all the way down to limited or full guardianship. And so there's a lot of different options out there. And so guardianship is not the only option for you and your young adult, but there are a lot of complex things that maybe go into some of these decisions. So I'm going to briefly go over a lot of them, but I know that it's not a light decision, and it's not something that you just decide in 1 minute and are going to be able to move forward. Definitely a conversation that you may want to have, with members of in your household as well as your youth, if that is appropriate for them. So supportive decision making is the least restrictive. That can be either through legal documentation or not. So that can look like a power of attorney, whether that's for financial issues, medical things, as well as, any types of land that they may have or anything in their name. And that can be through a power of attorney legal document, or whether, they just want to write down through the supportive decision-making project is a great resource that we have. And we have some great resources where your child can check boxes of what all they would like you to be involved in. And that allows them to take that paperwork to doctors, hospitals, even to IEP meetings and say, this is what I would like my parent or caregiver to be involved in. And does not have to be legally bound. So you don't have to have that notarized or anything of that nature as far as the supportive decision-making checkbox document. If you get a power of attorney, that does need to be notarized, but is a great conversation for you to have with your youth if appropriate. So that's the least restrictive environment. Is a supportive decision-making, then power of attorney. And also with the power of attorney, making sure that your young adult understands what they're signing whenever they go forth with that power of attorney. So they have to understand maybe not necessarily the legal jargon that's in it, but they have to understand that they are giving you or someone else in that document rights to XYZ things that that the power of attorney covers. So making sure you have that conversation, like I mentioned earlier, and make sure they completely understand what they're giving away as far as their rights and maybe expectations moving forward. And then guardianship is the very last one. That is the most restrictive that you can have, and that takes away all rights. So like I said, voting, any medical decisions, as well as financial decisions, things of that nature, that takes away everything. And it is extremely hard to reverse. So don't take the decision lightly to do full guardianship. It is appropriate for a lot of families and definitely something that is not questionable for lots of families as well. But that process starts at the probate court, and you are appointed someone who can determine whether or not that's the most appropriate decision. Your youth or young adult is then provided a guardian ad litem, and that is someone who represents your child to make sure that this is the most appropriate decision for your child moving forward. There are several fees that go involved as far as filing that. So there's a $150 fee to file with the probate court. And then if you have any legal representation moving forward, that depends on what their personal fees are. But here in South Carolina, I encourage families that you do not have to have full guardianship. And that's a great freedom that we have. Not all states have that. Some have either all or nothing. But there are great other programs out there, and maybe you start out with the least restrictive and say, hey, this is not working for me, and we can talk about others. And we're happy to talk through some of those options here at Family Connection. We've walked several families through all of those options before, provided paperwork and things of that nature. So definitely not something that you want to take lightly or do on your own. So a good conversation to have starting early. Okay, so estate planning. This is definitely something you would like to talk to a qualified attorney, as you think about that. And that can include special needs trust, a wills and trusts for you and your spouse, or a survivor benefit plan. That's specifically for military families. And you are able to have SSI and a special needs trust or a special needs trust and the Palmetto Able Savings Account. So that's something to keep in mind as you're moving forward. But those rules often change, so it's definitely something you want to talk to your attorney about. And those attorneys can be like disability rights, like Sally was saying, or an elder law attorney. But those ones who know and study the law often and think through that are definitely something to think through as you're moving forward. And then last but not least is a letter of intent. So this is something that, you know, you, wow, I'm losing so this provides information about what you would like to happen with things moving forward for your child who has a disability. So whether or not that's your bank account, investments made, any attorneys or relatives that you would like to be involved, things of that nature. And that's definitely something to have a conversation with your child about. And definitely something that you may want to include with your special needs trust if you think through that. But definitely something that you want to share with your child, in the case that something ever happens to you, or, just as you're moving forward to make sure that they understand completely what rights they have, what is happening moving forward with, any information or accounts that they have. So we've talked about a lot today, and I know it's a lot of information. I'm sure your brain is just overflowed. And I remember the first time I went through this as well. I know my brain was really flooded, just thinking through lots of options and things of that nature. But know that you're not alone in this. We are here to help support you through the whole process and navigating it through it all, through the emotions, through the financial piece, through the decision-making options, and all of that, as well as educationally too. So know that this is just the beginning of the process, and all you have to do is take one foot forward to begin. But know that you're not alone in all of this. It can be daunting and scary, and something that people don't talk about a lot. And so we never want you to think that you have to give up your parenting or not be a parent to your child anymore, but just options to think about as you're maybe stepping away from being as involved as you were through pediatrics. And then that is it. That is the end of our presentation. This is our information. We support families in English as well as in Spanish, and you can make a referral online through our website as well as calling our 1-800 number. Um, but yeah, is there any questions or anything else?
There was one question in the chat about how to complete a power of attorney, and where do we go to start that process?
Yeah, that's a great question. So from my understanding of power of attorney, there is a document online through SC.gov that you can download, and that is just a general power of attorney information, but there's also specific forms that are for the financial or educational or, estate planning. And those can be more specific, or you can have just a general power of attorney. And then once you get that, you can take that to your local bank or even the UPS store, and you have to take your own witnesses. I have learned that with families. You have to take, I believe, 2 of your own witnesses, and they will have to notarize it while they watch the independent sign that document, and then it should be, legally finalized. You can also do it through a lawyer or attorney if you're more comfortable that way, but that power of attorney document does not have to be through an attorney. But definitely, if you have an attorney already or have any specific questions about it or not sure, definitely reach out to one of the attorneys that we talked about earlier, whether that's elder rights, disability rights, things of that nature. They can definitely walk you through that, or we can as well.
Yeah. Thank you so much. So I think you did. All right, you guys, it's right at 1 o'clock. So we appreciate you guys joining us today. Like Hannah said, if you have any other questions or want to reach out to us or something pops in your brain later on, all of our information is here on the screen. And again, I am Sally and this is Hannah. So if you guys need anything, please feel free to reach out to us, and we really appreciate you joining us this afternoon. Y'all have a great day.